This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. So just a couple of housekeeping bits to get out of the way. As you've just heard, we are recording this session. Everyone that's been muted, cameras off anyway. We will have a question section towards the end, so by all means, put any questions in the chat as we go along, and time permitting, we will go through as many as we can. So thank you everyone for joining us. This is the first in a hopefully long-running series called VDC for me. So my name is Michael Paul. I'm a solution engineer focused on Veeam Data Cloud, Microsoft 365, and Entra within Veeam. I'm joined today by the always wonderful Hin. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Hin Tang, and I'm the VOG leader for Cloud City. And yeah, as Michael was saying, I hope that you guys are all excited about this new series on VDC for me. Yeah, I work for a service provider in Canada. And yeah, I'm proud to be working with all you guys and talking about this today. All right. So let's quickly, So quickly we'll go over the agenda for today. We've gone over the introductions of Michael and myself. We're basically with this one, we're going to go through a brief history of the Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 product and sort of the evolution to this new VDC product. And then we'll just go over why I need this. And honestly, with all the people that are on here, I'm sure that you guys are on here because you know that you need it. But we'll just go over some stats and some reasons. And then Michael will walk us through what's some of the new features in VDC M365. We'll go over some similarities and differences between the two to help us be able to make better decisions about which one to use in which situation. And then we'll go over Michael will go over the different editions of VDC for M365 and get into a comprehensive dive into what you get with each edition. Then we'll go through some frequently asked questions, and hopefully that will encourage you guys to think up some questions to ask us in the section 9. And then we'll just tease a future VDC for me session on VCSP. Okay. So this is just a brief history of where Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 has come from. The first edition came out in November 29th, 2016. It basically just backed up Exchange Online and Exchange On-Prem. Version 2 came out in 2018, and it introduced SharePoint and OneDrive for business. And in 2019, it added some more performance enhancements, as well as introduced the self-service portal. And in version 4 in 2019 as well, it added support for object storage so that you can now back up to Amazon S3 or Azure Blob or IBM Cloud. In 2020, version 5 came out, and that was a big one because it introduced Teams backup and recovery, as well as the new e-discovery capabilities. And in 2022, version 6 came out and introduced backup proxies and repository servers. Version 7 in 2023 introduced the backup and recovery of private and shared Microsoft Teams channels. And the big one recently was version 8 in 2024, which was a major redesign. It allowed immutability all the way through the backup process, and introduced Linux proxies, proxy pools, as well as using NATs for message queuing. So it's a major improvement, and then to show how quickly Veeam is actually innovating with this, they released 8.1 in January, just a few months after 8, which had further improvements for performance and scalability, and also just resolved some of the issues that people were having with the upgrade process to version 8.
I think this is, quite an interesting thing anyway, to show that next year we will have been backing up Microsoft 365 for a decade,
Yeah.
which is a huge milestone.
Mhm.
And when you consider that Microsoft 365 or Office 365 as it was then only came out towards the end of 2011, it's amazing to see that actually, yeah, we have been most of the life of Office 365 helping protect that data. So it's great, when we've seen that Microsoft are talking more actively about data protection of Microsoft 365 data, but just goes to show that, Veeam have been there from before it was cool to do. And yeah, when we consider just having a look at actually what has been achieved from that version 1 onwards. We started off with a Jet database with Exchange and adding these extra functions, and then we've added object storage support and immutability, and continue to. Everyone looks at the additional services, SharePoint, Teams, etc., but then also the quality of that data, self-service recovery portals, things like that. There's huge amounts in there that have been added in the background to keeping up with the speed of all the data growth that we're seeing around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, what we're seeing more is that Microsoft 365 isn't just email and anymore. It's really a company's storage, right? OneDrive is becoming the repository for everything for companies. So it's really important to have that backed up and be able to restore it quickly. And it's becoming a huge amount of data. Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to why. So latest statistics in 2024, there are about 345 million users of Microsoft 365 worldwide. And I mean, this is becoming outdated, but I think some people still believe that because it's in the cloud, Microsoft will protect their data, and that's not true. So, there are threats, obviously, with some accidental deletions or disgruntled employees, internal security breaches, or breaches from the outside. And there's also a lot of legal and compliance requirements for being able to pull that data back quickly. We'll just quickly go over the Microsoft 365 shared responsibility model again. I think most of you have seen this before, but I think one thing that people used to think is there's the recycle bin part is that they feel like their data is protected because if you delete it, then you can restore it from the recycle bin. But the reality is that recycle bin is only kept for 30 days by Microsoft. So for all the reasons that are mentioned here, data level deletions, disgruntled employees, ransomware, things like that. Your data is under threat, so we need to be able to back it up securely and restore it quickly.
One thing I'd like to add on that, so we're talking about the recycle bin, and not everything goes to the recycle bin.
That's right.
We think about that as I delete a document, it goes to the bin. When you think about different things, such as, I'll give an example of SharePoint lists. If you delete a column from that list, you won't find it in the recycle bin.
Mm-hmm.
There are gaps within that. Recycle bin really should be treated as a best effort of adoption. I've seen organizations that say, no, recycle bin's enough for us, and we'll accept the risk that something outside will happen, and then suddenly they do realize that something not on the outside really has happened. Someone has made that change, and there's no undo for it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, Michael. All right, so let's move on to what's new.
Yeah. So everyone, you might get some COVID flashbacks here because where Hin's presenting, I'm going to be saying next slide, please, an awful lot. I know, especially in the UK, that was a key thing on the daily briefings we had. But Hin, if you can take it away and
all right,
great.
Next slide.
Yes, please.
Ready.
So let's have a little bit of a 2024 in review. So what happened? Veeam brought out what we now call Veeam Data Cloud. And it started with the acquisition of a Veeam VCSP called CT4 and their product Cirrus Backup, which we rebranded into Veeam Data Cloud and have obviously started to add a lot since. But it's just an important thing to set the stage for the story really and where we began. If you could go to the next slide for me. We've done an awful lot since that time. It's from humble beginnings almost. And one of the key things that we have done in the past year is we have adopted Microsoft Backup Storage APIs. So this is a difference to the Graph APIs normally used to protect data. With the Graph API, we are fetching these items, we're pulling them out, we're storing them on, in our case for Veeam Data Cloud, Veeam supplied storage. But from a VB365 perspective, we are taking it out of Microsoft 365 and putting it into your own storage. You can apply your own retention there and keep that data as long as you want. But that does create a bottleneck. Each file is an API call, effectively, and Microsoft have a duty to provide a responsive service for all of their customers across the globe. So that means rate limiting is a natural evolution of that. The maximum number of API calls you can make per minute and per day are published. They're also, I would argue, best efforts, because if Microsoft is under a lot of pressures, a huge amount of tenant noise going on in situ, then they do reserve the right to throttle above and beyond that. So that's where Microsoft needed to create an answer to how do especially larger organizations, enterprises, have a ready response plan for this. And Microsoft came up with Microsoft Backup Storage, and that is something that Veeam were one of the launch partners for. We're a very, very proud Microsoft partner, and this is something that we launched, which we have called Veeam Data Cloud Express. So what was Cirrus Backup and became Veeam Data Cloud, we called that Veeam Data Cloud for Microsoft 365 Flex Edition. The Flex version is the Graph API. Express is the Microsoft Backup Storage APIs, where that data is stored within your tenant. And then we offered Premium as well, so you can have both of those in a cost-effective SKU. So if you go to the next slide for me, please, Hin, we will talk more about Express in a future slide, but it's just to set the scene there. Now, it's not quite the same as a big ticket item where you go, okay, we did Exchange and SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, but actually it's not just about ticking the box and moving on, because these are services that are always growing. A joke I heard years ago that stuck with me is that Microsoft have thousands of engineers developing Microsoft 365. Not one of them is tasked with finishing it. And it's true, because there's always improvements going on with these services. And likewise, there's improvements to the Graph APIs. That means that more data gets exposed that we can then protect. So we used to be able to protect public folders using basic authentication. And then with the implementation of the Graph API and the appropriate API calls to make to protect data with it, we've moved over to modern authentication. And one of the casualties there was public folder support. Whereas now that is within the Graph API, we can protect it using modern authentication. So it's back in Veeam Data Cloud, I'm happy to report. If you go on to the next slide for me. So repository naming and encryption changes. Well, first and foremost, encryption has always been in Veeam Data Cloud. It's mandated. But we have made some changes, some lifecycle improvements for our customers. So one of the first things is you've always been able to have multiple repositories. Veeam's consumption model for Veeam Data Cloud is still per user per month. The storage is just included within it as well. So you can have all these repositories, and naturally you want to make sure that they make sense to the organization. So we've added that ability to rename these repositories so you can give them the names that you want. And above and beyond that as well, as I mentioned, encryption has always been something supported by Veeam Data Cloud. We've added the ability for customers to add their own passkey. So they can now set their own passphrase passwords, and we can then re-encrypt the keys in the back end. We won't, break down the complex cryptography process into 20 seconds here, but effectively customers can now supply their own passphrases. And if you go to the next slide for me, please. So bulk restoration enhancements. One of the things that Express has allowed us to do is we can restore data at speeds of up to 6 terabytes per hour, which is much faster than you're going to get out of the Graph API. So to do that, we've added a bulk restore capability within Veeam Data Cloud focused on Express. And it allows you to upload CSVs of users, select users, target M365 groups containing those users, select SharePoint sites, whatever that combination of data that is impacted is, and then set the date and time you want to roll back to, and then fire it off. And it makes this orchestration process so much easier when you're dealing with bulk restorations. Now, that's not to say if you're on Flex, you can't have any kind of bulk recovery. We have added batch bulk restore capabilities as well. And there's a couple of other enhancements we've done that we'll talk about in a future slide as well. But the idea is that we're always focused on, it's become a case of disaster recovery versus cyber recovery here. They are starting to be seen as two different things. We think about disasters as our fire, our floods, whereas cyber recovery could be ransomware attacks, for example. And if you think about a Microsoft 365 ransomware attack, it's quite often, near enough all the time there's no sense of a compromise in the tenant that some computers being used to encrypt data from a Microsoft side. That's not the attack vector. The attack vectors are either someone is stealing credentials or gaining access, breaking through MFA, etc., to log in as a user and encrypt the data they have access to, or they're attacking the endpoint. And once the endpoint is compromised, it sees, okay, what data does this user have access to, and attacks from there. So these cyber recovery scenarios is where a lot of data destruction can be performed in a short period of time, and organizations need that ability to respond. So if you go to the next slide for me, please, Hin. So reporting improvements, this is something that on its own we've added, these little bits here and there, and collectively when you take a step back and go, oh, there's a huge amount actually we've done here. In the past year, we've added an automated report scheduler, and it's incredibly flexible as to what can be done. You can choose, I want to report every day or particular days of week, days of month, the first Monday of each month. All this flexibility built in there from all of these reports that we've built into the solution. And we are constantly adding revisions to the reports to make them easier to digest, adding new fields, new columns, and adding more reports as well. And we'll continue to see that as time moves on. If you head on to the next one for me, Hin. So the next one here being RBAC improvements. Well, as we add all of these features and functions, naturally we want to have the controls in place there. So there's a comprehensive RBAC model within Veeam Data Cloud. And as we add additional capabilities where it makes sense for an RBAC control, we put it in. So bulk recovery is a key example. Before the bulk restoration feature for VDC Express was added, instead, if you think about how we were restoring data with the Graph API, we were looking at, okay, let's just restore items that are changed, items that are missing. The potential for accidental data deletion was quite low. At most, you're just overwriting a file with a previous version. The way that Express works is we are rolling back to a point in time. So there is a potential for data loss there of anything newer. Now, that can create a risk. We want to manage that. So straight away, we've added an RBAC control for that bulk restoration capability. So that if you did have, say, a first-line help desk user, you want them to perform restores, but you don't want them to do that at scale, that's absolutely fine. And the RBAC model with Veeam Data Cloud is everything is implicitly denied by default, and you have to explicitly approve functionality. So it's very easy to consume. If you head on to the next slide for me there. Perfect. So we've made it through the majority of the what's new highlights there, but there's more that we'll talk about as it becomes appropriate. So VDC or VB365, this is one of the questions that inevitably you're going to ask yourself. And if you go on to the next slide for me there, Hin, rather than attempt to answer this question for you, instead, let's talk about the ways that you can protect Microsoft 365 with Veeam. It's good news, you've got choices. Bad news, you've got choices. And there's going to be a decision that will be right for your organization and not for someone else. So if we have a look at the original way that you could consume Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 or Office 365 as it was way back then, you would deploy the backup solution. So you were responsible for all of the backup job planning, the architecture, providing the compute, providing the storage and the networking. You're responsible for all of the patches. If there were any issues, you were responsible for investigating those logs as well and working with support. And then that is all separate to your day-to-day backup operations, making sure there are no data gaps within your tenancy, performing the restores, making sure that you have added enough compute and networking capabilities to hit the SLAs that the organization requires. So if you go to the next slide for me there, it's going to be an animation, so you can see we now have backup as a service, as we call it. So what that is offering with Veeam Data Cloud is taking away the architectural design decisions from yourselves. It's taking away the need to bring the compute, the networking, the storage, the patching, all of that is wrapped up into Veeam Data Cloud instead. And that just leaves you responsible for the backup operations, the restore operations, and making sure that your jobs are set to adhere to those SLAs that you require. Now, if you move on to the next bit for me there, Hin, this is where our trusted partner network, such as Hin's organization, comes into effect. Managed backup as a service, that isn't going away, and that is a valid answer for a lot of customers. And that is where instead a partner can help with all of that architectural planning, whether it's reselling Veeam Data Cloud services with a managed service wraparound, or whether that is a custom architecture, because there will be different design decisions. But that's where working with a VCSP can still help.
Yeah, and Michael, this is a great slide. I really love the fact that customers now have choice, right? And this is a really good breakdown of it's kind of similar to the Microsoft shared responsibility, right? It breaks down what you want to have control over and what you want to sort of let someone else take over. So yeah, that's a great
Absolutely.
slide.
And Veeam's always been proud of our VCSPs, and we'd never want to be stepping on their toes here. And again, you can see that the whole point of Veeam Data Cloud is to help take away a lot of those pain points and enable choice, enable a customer that doesn't necessarily have all those skills in-house to come up with an effective data protection strategy, to not have their data at risk. Because if we boil this down to what we're all trying to achieve, it's data resilience. It's the ability to be prepared for the unexpected. It's the ability to look at Microsoft shared responsibility model and say, that's fine that I'm responsible for my data. I know that I've taken control of that, and I have chosen to do it, whether that is Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, Veeam Data Cloud, or one of those options via a VCSP. Okay, if we go on to the next slide, please.
Yep.
So just to give a bit of a focus on the Veeam Data Cloud elements, because we are talking about Veeam Data Cloud for me. There you go. I said it. I said the title. So the purpose of this, as we've already alluded to, is, and this just gives a more granular view of what is being taken away. Instead of managing your VB365 server, instead of managing the proxies that are going to perform those Graph API calls and all of the storage and all of the bandwidth that is required there, Veeam is going to take all of that. They're going to give you the unlimited storage. It's their responsibility to make sure there's enough proxy compute there to deliver the performance necessary. They're going to make sure that the networking is configured in a secure manner. They're going to manage that infrastructure. They're going to perform the proactive maintenance. They're going to make the updates and install the patches that are inevitably released, because the Graph API is always changing, so at a bare minimum, we need to keep abreast with that. But there are still the bits that are under the user control, and that is the creation of the backup jobs, the performing of the restores, the discovery search capabilities as well. But then we get to this extra bit. You'll see we've got this optional configuration, and this is where things start to get taken to another level with Veeam Data Cloud and also with Veeam Cloud Service Providers, because there is always that risk of insider threats. There's always that risk of accidental misconfigurations. And one of the things when you're the administrator of your own environment is that you run the risk of potentially making a mistake or intentionally making a mistake, one of your colleagues might do. So that's where not holding the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, can come in handy. So by enforcing RBAC within Veeam Data Cloud, it means that someone with local admin rights to a box can't try and circumvent any security because it's all completely out of band. It is a web portal. The ability to perform additional functions such as restricting access by IP ranges, well, this is again something that's accessible over the internet, so straight away you can have that control. You can specify different retention periods, and because it's immutable, there's no way of someone going through and accidentally or maliciously trying to delete those backups. It's all of these capabilities that are layered in and enforced, and the same with all of the logging that is performed within this service. That ability to say, okay, I'm trusting you with these permissions because I know you need them to do your job. If you do abuse them, then we will know. We will have the audits. And because, again, the end user is not the ultimate administrator of the service, they can't go through and tamper with the logs. They can't delete that evidence. It becomes indisputable, effectively. And that's some of the things that Veeam Data Cloud is offering, effectively. It's taking away the administrative headaches. It's letting you get on with just making sure that the backups are there as frequently as you need. You can restore and search anything you want, and security is baked in.
So, Michael, I have a question about the user-controlled side.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a company doesn't have the expertise to do all that straight away. Is that something that Veeam walks them through, or a VSPC would be walking them through?
Yeah, so it depends on how the customer's consuming this. So a VCSP absolutely could do that, and typically I would see a VCSP normally offering some kind of a managed service wraparound there where they are taking on that responsibility effectively to make sure those jobs are aligned exactly to what they need. But also, even if the customer is trying to, go it alone and they want Veeam Data Cloud, but they're happy that they'll create the backup jobs, they'll create the restores, but they want that bit of guidance. Well, in addition to all of Veeam's documentation and videos, there's a customer success team. And the customer success team is working with customers day in, day out to help them on board and answer those initial questions as they go live.
Okay, great. That's good to know.
Okay, so if we head to the next slide. So additions. I did mention we'd talk more about Express, and this is where we're going to talk about it. So if you go on to the next slide for me. So Microsoft plus Veeam. Okay, if you expand this out for me,
yep.
What we're going to look at is we've got Veeam Data Cloud, Express, and Flex capabilities. Okay, so Veeam has looked at Microsoft Backup Storage and the Graph API and declared that they are better together rather than choosing a side. If one was better than the other in every way, then that is the way we'd go. So if we have a look at Veeam Data Cloud Express, at a high level, what we're doing here is we are using the Microsoft Backup Storage API. It is taking your data and keeping it within your Microsoft 365 tenant. It's backups within the tenancy. Okay, and those APIs, they support Exchange, they support SharePoint, and they support OneDrive for Business. Well, there's a gap there of Microsoft Teams. So straight away, we know that Flex has value to add there because we can protect Microsoft Teams. We can protect those other workloads as well, but we can support Teams as well. If you go to the next one for me, please. And this is something I was alluding to earlier. So Express is the fastest speeds available on the market there because we can do up to 6 terabytes per hour. It's up to 3 terabytes per hour for Exchange, and it's up to 3 terabytes per hour for OneDrive or SharePoint there. And the onboarding is incredibly fast. The RPOs are excessively low. They are 10-minute intervals. But because that data still resides within the M365 tenant, that can create some risk there as well in terms of if the tenant becomes completely unavailable. So that is where Flex still adds that value, that you can have that copy of data egressed out and stored at whatever, because Veeam Data Cloud uses Microsoft Azure, that can be stored within any Azure region that we support around the globe. If you go on to the next piece for me. So we've touched on the restore speeds already. So again, Express is very much about that cyber response, the ability to respond to ransomware attacks swiftly. But then if we look at what Flex is offering there as well, Well, at present, Express is only allowing us to do an entire rollback in time. So if we want to restore a SharePoint site, for example, we choose the date and the time that we're going back to, and simplifying it down slightly, we are effectively dropping the database of that site and putting back in place one from a previous point in time. Whereas with Flex, we know that we've got the granularity. So quite often you won't want to roll your OneDrive back to 2 days ago to recover a lost file. Instead, you just want that individual file. Now, there's something that is going to come to Microsoft Backup Storage. The initial release of Microsoft Backup Storage was only back in August of last year. And Microsoft have committed to making multiple improvements to this, but we've all got to be a V1 at some point, right? We're now on VB 365 8.1. We had to start at version 1, and so did Microsoft, and they're going to continue to evolve this. So we know that Flex still plugs that gap there, making sure that we can do file level restorations. Okay, and if you go on to the next one for me. So you'll see here where that data is stored and what that ultimately means. So backups are being stored inside Microsoft. Okay, that's great because there are some customers that will naturally be concerned around any backup vendor holding their data outside of their tenancy. They might be legally compelled to not being able to store that data anywhere else. So straight away that becomes a risk for some organizations. And they've already accepted that risk with Microsoft 365 because they are storing their data in there. Otherwise, they're not going to have any issues at all with regards to, well, we wouldn't even have to back up their data, would we, if it's not in Microsoft 365? But that does still create some concerns there, as we mentioned, because the data is still in the source. So being able to choose that different location is going to be key. Wherever you set your production data within Microsoft 365, that is where MBS stores the data. Again, that is great for some customers, but for some others, they might say, well, actually, I'm not geo-locked into this specific location. I can also store my data here, and that's where I want the copy to be. So again, with Flex, we're pulling that data out, which means we can store it anywhere in the world that we need to. We can lock all the access down with our RBAC model. The data is immutable regardless. And one of the key things as well, really just to mention here, is that retention is actually something that is locked in with Express at the moment. You get 12 months retention, no more, no less. And that is every 10 minutes for the past 52 weeks within Exchange. And it's every 10 minutes for the last 2 weeks within SharePoint and OneDrive. And then it's 1 per week for the previous 50 weeks. So again, that doesn't always fit for some customers, whereas with Flex that you'll be backing up the data at the frequency required, and the data is retained for as long as necessary, up to and including forever. Okay, so if you click on from there.
Just to clarify that point about the backup location, that has to be within Azure still, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Veeam Data Cloud is hosted on Azure, so any Azure region. Now, the point is, rather than just making our customers choose Express or Flex, this is why we introduce Premium, so that customers can have that best of both. They don't need to choose. Okay, and if you go to the next slide for me. Perfect. So this is to give a more comprehensive breakdown of Microsoft 365 backup storage and what that means. So we can see here that on the left-hand side, Express. In summary, it's for the fast backups. We know that it's for the bulk restores. It's about that cyber recovery, and the data is stored within that boundary. But there are things that it can't do yet, such as the ability to perform searches against that backup data. There's no exit strategy for that data either, because wherever you've chosen to keep that data within M365, that's where it is. There's no export capabilities to it. You restore back into M365, and that is it. Okay. Now, if you move on to the next slide for me. Here we go. So that was just to give a rundown of Express and Premium and Flex and where they all fit together. And as you can see, it's great to have choice. Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. That's a really great breakdown of all the different additions and all the choices that we have with VDC for Microsoft 365. I just threw in some of these FAQs, and hopefully we'll just be able to talk through them. So, what are some of the best practices for creating backup policies on VDC?
So I would say you want as few backup jobs as you realistically require. There's always going to be a balancing act of how many users you have, how many SharePoint sites you have, and trying to protect that whilst making it easy to manage. So naturally, what ends up happening is you have really what I would class as a fault domain. If you think about once you've performed your initial backup, we're working on incrementals, we're always just processing the latest data. So it can make sense to just choose to have, say, entire jobs for services such as SharePoint or Teams and just be done with it. Okay, that works. There are some organizations that are large and then they say, well, actually, you know what? I'm concerned that I might have too many users churn too much data, especially in OneDrive. OneDrive can be 1 terabytes worth of storage per user.
That's right.
Okay. So straight away, if you've got a backup job of say 20,000 users and you get just 10% of those users decide to ingest a load of data into OneDrive, and straight away there's 2,000 users that are going to make the backup job take a lot longer. That can start to add risks into your RPO strategies. So there's always going to be that balancing act there.
Right.
That's what I'd say. So it's always going to be a case by case, but again, that's where your VCSPs, your customer success team are going to help. Now, the other thing as well is you might have users within different geolocations, and you're going to have different places that you're going to pin them to.
Right.
So with that, you might very well say, okay, I'm going to make a Microsoft 365 group, and it's going to contain all of my users from, I'll be selfish, I'm from the UK, so I'm going to say UK,
Yep.
all right? And I will create my backup job that targets that group. And what's really nice is because we're targeting Microsoft 365 groups, if you've got Entra ID Premium, you can create dynamic groups, and that dynamic group will have its membership based on Entra ID attributes. So I could just set it to a country location, and that way, as I onboard any new staff members, straight away they get added into the M365 group because they've been created in Entra, because they've got the M365 license, and then we just start backing them up. You want your backup solution to be low touch. You just want it to be protecting your data and know that when you need it, it's there, it's got your back.
So is VDC aware of the geolocation of the users? Like when the backup jobs are created, does it store the data in the appropriate region, or
Whilst,
something that's manual?
so it's a good point. And it's not that we're not aware, it's more that there's the difference between what your source is and where you might want your destination. So just because we see that someone is within the UK, we might actually say, you know what, we know that the data is in the UK, so we want the data outside the UK. And thinking about the recovery window, there's the endless scales of how much resiliency is enough. You know, it starts off with like, right, I've got another copy of a file and it's on another drive, and then
Mm-hmm.
it goes on to another server, and then it's in a different rack, and then it's in a different building, then it's in a different town and country and continent.
Yeah.
And then we get to the one no one's mastered yet, interplanetary, right?
Yeah. Not yet.
Point
Soon.
you say that that is enough. And just because a user is in the UK, that might mean we need to keep the data in the UK, or
Mm-hmm.
it might mean that we want to keep the data out the UK. If I just had UK and Germany as my basis of operation, I might say I want UK data in Germany, German data in UK, because it might be that my company's policy is that all data can be shared between those two locations.
Mm-hmm.
Again, every organization is different, so it's more about knowing what the customer wants.
Right. But all of that is doable within
Yeah.
the policy creation.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Second question I was thinking about was, will VDC ever have features before VB365?
The intention is no, and we are using VB365 as our engine. So just to underline that point there, we are using the same binaries as the VCSPs as you can run yourself. What we are doing instead is we are wrapping the service around using the REST APIs and integrating into that. effectively. So that is the goal. I'm very much aware that there's VDC Express and Premium, and Microsoft Backup Storage isn't currently available within VB 365, but that was an externally influenced decision there. That wasn't actually a decision that Veeam made, effectively. So,
Okay. Next question, would I need help from an Entra ID administrator to configure VDC M365? There's segregation between departments.
So effectively with that, it's down to what we mean by an Entra ID administrator. You would need a global administrator within your M365 tenant, which ultimately becomes your Entra, to make sure that because we're using modern authentication, we need to deploy app registrations, whether that is automatically via the web interface or whether that is a manual process that is performed by your Entra ID administrator to then be imported. Okay. So at the very least, you're going to need a global administrator.
Okay, because there's some guidance there. I've had some situations where they want to do it manually. They don't want Veeam to do it automatically. So they would need an administrator to create those applications with the appropriate permissions.
Yeah.
So, okay.
The thing I would say I've personally come across more is when people are applying conditional access policies that are incredibly prohibitive. And this is where, we want to work with the security teams here. So I would just say that if you've already got a lot of conditional access policies in place and they are restrictive, I would just suggest working with the team in advance to say, look, we want to onboard this backup as a service. It's going to use app registrations here. Let's go through the pre-approvals. Let's make sure that if we do trip up on any conditional access policies, that we've got that configured.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, cool. Next question, I guess, is Entra ID backup a part of VDC M365? And I guess the feature is, will it be?
Well, I can't talk about roadmap much there, but effectively, Entra is not part of VB365. Entra is part of our Veeam backup and replication tool.
Right.
So ultimately, Veeam have decided where that's going to sit, and that's not within the VB365 product.
Okay. All right. And the final one, has VDC M365 solved the issue with Microsoft throttling? I think you kind of answered this.
Well, this is it, because Express works around that completely by keeping the data within the M365 boundary, and therefore, Microsoft are responsible effectively for the adherence to the RPOs that they're offering there. So in some ways, yes. In some ways, throttling is just a natural part of working with APIs. Instead, what we've done is we've expected that there will be a throttle. We've worked to optimize that. We've worked to optimize the performance, and we're making sure that as more efficient ways of working become available, that we are always adopting them. So I'd say, as much as I'd love to have said,
yeah, 100%.
There's more nuance to it. It's the old consultant's approach, isn't it? It depends.
Good answer. Yes, that's right. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on. Michael has kind of teased this already. VDC for M365 is available currently for VCSPs.
Yeah.
We will be doing a dedicated session. Tentatively, it's scheduled for June, end of June. So keep your eye open for that. We're going to have a special session just talking about how VDC and VCSPs work together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess we can open it up for any questions that have been posted.
Yeah. So I don't see any in the chat at the moment, but by all means, if anyone has got a question, please just post it in the chat. What I'll do just while we're waiting on any questions is I'm going to actually just do a little bit of a tour through the Veeam Data Cloud portal, so we can actually talk about some of the things that I was mentioning earlier and give some visibility into it. So give me just 1 minute and I'll share my screen.
All right.
Okay, so everyone should be able to see the Veeam Data Cloud portal now. So let's just touch on some key points here. So we're using Entra ID for single sign-on. It keeps things nice and simple. It means that you're inheriting the security posture that your internal teams have already adopted, conditional access policies, privileged identity management, all of those capabilities are built in there. We've provided some dashboards that aren't just related to Veeam Data Cloud, but also to the Microsoft 365 service, such as the M365 license activity. We're reporting on any of those users that you've got, that you're paying for an M365 license, and they're not logging in, they're not being used. You might have, a natural thing of, okay, someone's on maternity leave or someone's on long-term sick, things like that, where their account needs to remain licensed. But I've seen this with organizations where they've got hundreds or thousands of licenses allocated that just aren't being put to good use. And that costs the organization money. It's the same with the M365 storage usage dashboard. We're showing the users within the environment and how much data they are consuming within M365. Backup policies is very simple and straightforward. Just like you'd expect from VB365, you see a lot of the same controls. But if I touch on some of the key VDC specific points, I mentioned auditing early on. So if I go down here, we can see the recent user activity. What this is doing is this is tracking, who is performing restores, what are they restoring, when are they restoring it? And there's a huge amount of different events that we're tracking here. Okay. Now, one of the other things I just want to show you is, so if I go into Outlook and I select a mailbox, so I'll choose a shared mailbox here. So when I go to restore this, you'll see I've got the option to restore to its original location. One of the things we've done is we've pre-baked into the product. Okay, if you are licensed for premium, we're going to say, look, this mailbox is licensed for both. So do you want to do a complete express rollback, or do you want to just pepper in the files that we need? So when we restore, we've always been as optimized as possible, just changed items, just missing items. You can restore it elsewhere. One of the things we've done as well, which is nice for mailboxes, is a download in background function. So a Exchange mailbox can be up to 100 gigabytes in size, and an archive mailbox can be up to 1.5 terabytes in size. No one wants to wait for us to generate a PST with all of that data and then download it in a single file. Fun fact, PSTs aren't allowed to be larger than 50 gig. That is the file size format constraint. So what we do with download in background, it's designed for these larger download scenarios. Instead, we get the data and we chunk it up into 10 gig chunks, present it on secured Azure storage, and then you can go and download those chunks. So if your download fails partway through, don't worry, go and refetch that chunk, because it's much easier to re-download 10 gig segments than get 1 terabyte into 1.5 terabytes and then have to go again. Okay. If you're on a metered internet connection, I would feel very sorry for you at that point. But one of the other things just to show as well, in terms of if we look at bulk restorations, so if I choose these mailboxes, choose to restore, one of the things I want to show you is how we're always trying to optimize, even if someone's not paying for Express or Premium, doesn't mean that we don't want them to have the best experience possible with a cyber recovery. So one of the things that we pushed out last month is our mass mailbox restore feature. And what this means is that when you're choosing a batch of mailbox data to restore, you can prioritize recent data first, because I don't know about you, but I rarely delete an email. So I don't believe I would need even 5% of my mailbox during a cyber event just to carry on working. And that's going to be true for a lot of organizations. So you can choose to perform the recent items restoration first. So this is completely customizable. So I could go, you know what, I want to have my last 31 days of data, or I want to go all the way down to, say 14 or less. And what we're going to do is we're going to restore that recent data before doing anything historical. And that means that your kind of minimum viable product of getting on with your day is achieved a lot faster. And then we'll go and put the rest of the data in. Now, inevitably, if you do that, there's going to be this outside chance that someone says, oh, I need this file or this email. And actually, guess what? I've chosen 14 days here. Someone needs an email from 16 days ago. There's a self-service portal. I'm going to assume the IT guy is far too stressed to be dealing with every individual restore, but they can go in the self-service portal and they can browse into their own mailbox and they can restore that individual item. And when this gets round to restoring it, it goes, oh, it's already there. I'll skip over it. We support multiple recovery sessions in parallel, so it makes it very easy to do this. So there we go. That's just a little bit of an example there, just to show you as well, again, the RBAC controls that are here. There's a huge amount of capabilities, and I won't do it a misjustice here by trying to talk through it in the next few minutes. But instead, I see we haven't got any questions in the chat. So if we push on, so if I ask you, Hin, to share your screen again.
Yep.
So just stop sharing.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, as Michael said, there doesn't look to be any questions in the chat, so we're just going to move on to what's next. So what's next in the series, we will be talking next month with Veeam MVP Tim Smith about VDC Vault. So that's something to look forward to. Probably around this, it's going to be the last week of March. I think we haven't finalized the date, but it'll be announced very soon. All right, and would like to thank you very much for your time today. I hope that this session was informative and entertaining, hopefully. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Michael, any last words?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you everyone for attending, and these are going to carry on. We're aiming to do them one a month, and each time we're going to talk about a different product or service within Veeam Data Cloud here. So you might find that there's the odd month where you say, you know what, I'm not working with that. That's fine. By all means, attend anyway and see what we're talking about. And otherwise, it's always going to be different content every month.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.